Join our family of creators. Your support means the world to us. Subscribe now to the Content Creator channel. Your support keeps us motivated and helps us bring you fresh, exciting content every week. Hit that subscribe button and be part of our journey. Right, let's talk about protests. Specifically, the massive, sprawling, and often very loud protests that defined the Trump presidency. If you spent any time on the more, shall we say, creative corners of the internet, you'd be convinced there was a single puppet master pulling all the strings. A shadowy figure probably stroking a fluffy white cat in a volcano lair, meticulously orchestrating every single person with a cardboard sign. This mastermind, they claim, is a billionaire supervillain, usually George Soros because of course it is, who activates his army of paid protesters with a secret signal, like a bat signal made of organic kale and existential dread. It's a tidy, compelling narrative. It has a clear villain, a secret plot, and it makes everything feel simple. The only tiny, minuscule, insignificant problem with this theory, it's complete and utter nonsense. The idea of a single, all-powerful entity controlling a nationwide movement is as ludicrous as a hamster running a hedge fund. The reality is that the anti-Trump protest movement wasn't a top-down operation commanded by a single brain. It was a messy, chaotic, and beautifully decentralized explosion of civic engagement. So if there wasn't a Dr. Evil figure coordinating everything from a hollowed-out volcano, who was in charge? The answer is as simple as it is wonderfully complicated: everyone. And no one. The anti-Trump resistance was a sprawling coalition of the willing, a hodgepodge of existing groups and brand new ones that materialized seemingly overnight. Think of it less like a disciplined army, and more like a massive, unauditioned flash mob. The most famous example is, of course, Indivisible. This wasn't some long-established political machine. It was started by a handful of former congressional staffers who wrote a Google Doc. That's it, a Google Doc, titled Indivisible, a practical guide for resisting the Trump agenda. It went viral, offering a simple, replicable playbook for pressuring members of Congress. Suddenly thousands of Indivisible chapters popped up, from Indivisible Boise to Indivisible Boca Raton, all run by local volunteers who had probably never organized anything more complicated than a neighborhood potluck before. And let's not forget the faith communities. Churches, synagogues, and mosques became vital organizing centers, transforming their social halls into sign-making workshops and their pulpits into platforms for social justice. Then you have organizations like Move On. It acted as a digital hub, using its massive email and text message lists to alert millions of members about protests, petitions, and call-in days. The true strength of the movement wasn't a single leader but thousands of them, each leading their own small platoon in a much larger, uncoordinated, and surprisingly effective war of attrition. The engine of the anti-Trump movement wasn't a well-oiled, centrally funded machine. It was a sputtering, duct-taped, yet surprisingly powerful engine of distributed action. The defining characteristic was its lack of a central command. It was, in essence, the political equivalent of whack-a-mole. Every time the administration did something outrageous, a new protest would pop up, seemingly out of nowhere. Consider the typical life cycle of a protest. It rarely started with a directive from Washington, D.C. Instead, it would begin with a spark, a controversial executive order, an offensive tweet, a shocking news report. That spark would ignite on social media, where a local activist, a small community group, or even just a concerned citizen would create a Facebook event page. The event would be shared, then shared again. Suddenly, a plan made by 3 people in a coffee shop would have hundreds or even thousands of RSVPs. It was spontaneous, reactive, and incredibly fast. Of course, this decentralization could also lead to chaos. Sometimes 2 different groups would schedule a protest at the same time and place without realizing it. Messaging could be inconsistent, with one group focusing on environmental policy while another was chanting about immigration. But this glorious chaos was also its strength. It reflected the broad, diverse coalition of people who were united by their opposition to the administration, even if they had different primary concerns. It was too big, too widespread, and too genuinely popular to be the work of a few paid actors. Now, it's important to acknowledge that there were wealthy donors who were vehemently opposed to Donald Trump. There were indeed well-funded groups of Republicans and conservative operatives who spent millions of dollars to oppose Trump. But here's the crucial, often deliberately ignored distinction. They weren't funding street protests, they were funding television ads. And there is a world of difference between paying for a 30-second spot during Jeopardy and paying for 10,000 people to show up in a park. Groups like the Lincoln Project and Republican Voters Against Trump became famous for their slick, hard-hitting advertisements. Their founders were seasoned GOP strategists who knew exactly which buttons to push to get under the president's skin. Their battleground was the airwaves, not the avenues. Street protests, on the other hand, are about building solidarity, demonstrating public opposition, and putting direct pressure on elected officials. You don't organize a march of 100,000 people to change one specific voter's mind. You do it to show the sheer scale of dissent and to energize your own side. Conflating these two distinct forms of opposition is a critical mistake, and one that conspiracy theorists gleefully make. This is a classic bait and switch. Alright, let's talk about the ghost under the bed of modern American politics, Antifa. The way some people talk about it, you'd think it was a real-life version of Spectre or Hydra, complete with a secret headquarters, a membership roster, and even a 401k plan. The only problem is, it's almost entirely a fantasy. Antifa is not an organization, it's an ideology, it's a tactic, it is, at best, just a label. Let's be clear, Antifa is short for anti-fascist. As a political stance, that's not exactly controversial. Most people, one hopes, are against fascism. Anyone can be Antifa simply by showing up to oppose a neo-Nazi rally. It's more of a verb than a noun. You don't join Antifa, you do Antifa. The actions associated with Antifa are almost entirely local and reactive. A small, autonomous affinity group in Portland, Oregon, might hear about a far-right rally and decide to organize a counter-protest. And what about the funding? The idea that George Soros or some other shadowy donor is bankrolling Antifa is one of the most persistent and honestly baseless conspiracy theories out there. Despite numerous investigations by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, there has never been a shred of credible evidence to support the claim of a central funding source. These are small, self-funded groups. They raise money through GoFundMe campaigns for legal support or pass a hat at a meeting. If you want to understand how millions of people organize so quickly without a central leader, you need to look at the device you're probably holding in your hand right now. The anti-Trump protest movement was powered by social media. It was a revolution coordinated through hashtags, mobilized via Facebook events, and fueled by the viral spread of outrage. Social media wasn't just a tool for the movement, it was its central nervous system. Think about the Women's March. It began not in the boardroom of a powerful non-profit, but with a Facebook post by a grandmother in Hawaii named Teresa Shook. She created an event page, and it exploded. Within a single day, thousands had responded. Hashtags like #Women'sMarch and #YIMarch unified the disparate local events into a single, global phenomenon. When the administration announced its travel ban on a Friday afternoon, protests erupted at airports across the country by Saturday. How? Because of hashtags like #NoBanOwall and #MuslimBan. People saw what was happening on Twitter, found a local event on Facebook, and just went. The organization was happening in real time, a decentralized swarm of activity coordinated through shared digital spaces. The 4 years of the Trump administration were punctuated by a series of massive, memorable protests. It all began, of course, on January 21, 2017, the day after the inauguration. The Women's March was, quite simply, one of the largest single-day protests in American history. Hot on its heels came the airport protests in response to the administration's controversial travel ban. This was grassroots organizing at its most spontaneous. There was no single organizer. The March for Our Lives in 2018, organized by the student survivors of the Parkland school shooting, brought hundreds of thousands to Washington to demand gun control. In the summer of 2018, the Families Belong Together marches erupted in response to the family separation policy at the border, coordinated over 750 events across the country. The Nobody is Above the Law rallies were pre-planned to trigger automatically in the event the Mueller report was suppressed or Robert Mueller was fired. The common thread in all these moments is a coalition model, a mix of established nonprofits, new grassroots groups, and spontaneous citizen action, all coming together for a common cause. Whenever a large protest materializes, a parallel industry of conspiracy theories springs up alongside it, and the anti-Trump years were a golden age for this kind of bunk. The undisputed heavyweight champion of these conspiracies is, of course, the idea that billionaire philanthropist George Soros single-handedly funds the entire progressive movement, especially its more disruptive elements. This theory is the political equivalent of blaming every unexplained noise in your house on a ghost. It's lazy, baseless, and frankly, a bit anti-Semitic. The facts are this. George Soros's Open Society Foundations does donate to a wide range of civil society groups, including some well-known organizations like the ACLU and Planned Parenthood. But that is a far, far cry from funding Antifa or paying protesters. It's like saying because you buy Nike shoes, you are personally funding every single thing LeBron James says or does. Extensive fact-checking by news organizations from Reuters to the Associated Press has found zero evidence that Soros or his foundations have ever directly paid people to protest. Another classic is the paid protester myth, often accompanied by blurry photos of buses as proof that activists are being shipped in from out of state. Yes, sometimes groups charter buses to get people to a major national rally, like the Women's March. That's not a conspiracy. That's just called carpooling on a grand scale. If these protesters were all paid, it would be the worst-kept secret in history. Someone would have produced a pay stub by now, but they haven't, because it isn't happening. So after all that, what's the big takeaway? It's this: the anti-Trump protest movement was not a conspiracy. It was not the product of a single puppet master, a shadowy cabal, or a billionaire's checkbook. It was something far more powerful and far more American, a messy, sprawling, and profoundly democratic uprising of ordinary citizens. It was a movement defined by its decentralization, its reliance on local leaders, and its ability to mobilize millions of people who had never considered themselves activists before. The power of the movement came from its diversity. It was indivisible groups in suburban living rooms, MoveOn members responding to a text alert, students marching for gun control, faith leaders organizing for immigrant rights, and scientists marching for, well, science. This lack of a central command, which critics saw as a weakness, was its greatest strength. It made the movement resilient, adaptable, and impossible to decapitate. Of course, the movement was not perfect, but it was, overwhelmingly, a non-violent movement. For every isolated incident of a broken window, there were millions of people peacefully marching, chanting, and holding signs. Ultimately, the search for a puppet master reveals more about the searcher than the subject. It's easier to believe in a conspiracy than to confront the reality of widespread popular dissent. But the evidence is clear. The anti-Trump resistance was a testament to the enduring power of grassroots organizing. It was a reminder that in a democracy, the most powerful political office is that of the private citizen. And when enough of those citizens get together, they don't need a puppet master to make their voices heard. They just need a cause, a hashtag, and a place to